For those of you who saw the presentations on the web, originally there wasn't a musician, but as I listened more and more to the musicians and artists in our exhibition, it became clear that for the conversation to be a really well-rounded one, that we needed one of the musicians on the panel. One, I thought they could really engage very well with you because one of their challenges in doing this exhibition here is the architecture and not having closed spaces and the music kind of moving. Is this on already? Oh, it is? Are we sure?
Yes, it is.
It is?
I can stop it.
No. If it's on, is it on?
It's on.
Awesome. Okay. And engaging about that, and then actually engaging with you, because in the lead up to this exhibition, there was some conversations about some aerial performance, and that didn't work out, and kind of where the intellectual reasoning and thought process was around that. So that's why I thought it would be really valuable to have one of the musicians on the panel, and that's what we did. So we're just giving her a few moments to get ready and join us.
4 hours.
After 4 hours of nonstop playing.
That's only fair. That's as long as Bruce Springsteen.
As long as what?
That's Bruce Springsteen.
Bruce Springsteen, yeah.
4 hours.
That's true. Yay. You are like queen. You know, you come from a 4-hour performance, so. So, good evening, everybody. I'm Abaseh Mirvali. I'm the director of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Santa Barbara. Hi, Nigel. Hi, Sarah. And I'm really pleased to host the 4th volume of Exhibition Makers. This was a kind of a conversation series that we created when I came, because I find that people often are really unaware of, they just see the end product and they never see kind of how the sausage is being made and how we get to where you were ready for you to live the experience. And it's also a way for us in the museum to reach out to our colleagues who are doing amazing work in this community and highlight what they're doing, because we all have different communities that support us. We'd like it to be cross support for all the organizations in town. And so this platform has served, you know, we've had the director of the Lotus Land, Beatrice Wood Center, the curator for photography, the curator for architecture at the SBMA, the lead prep for the SBMA Museum, Santa Barbara Art Museum. So we've had diverse voices talking about what they do and what their organizations do. So tonight's conversation, just to kind of create a base before I ask our panelists, to whom I'm very grateful for everyone accepting to participate, is in relationship to the exhibition Kunsthalle for Music. It is a really special exhibition, and every exhibition is special to those of us that are curators, but this one in particular, it's making us question our role as a curator, to look at music and performance and how you exhibit it in a museum context. And it's the beauty of imperfection and the perfection. Because as musicians and performers, they're taught to be very perfect, and this is not a perfect setup. The 4 hours are dictated by their interaction with the audience. Sometimes there is no audience, how they live through that, what goes into the thinking, the transitions, the architectural context of the space and how that influences how we're presenting the exhibition here, as opposed to Witte de Wit in Rotterdam, where they had several stories 2 stories, I think, 2 floors where they were having the performance. So I thought that this would be gorgeous. And dance is something that I have to say I'm very partial to. I think dance is beautiful, and we have such a rich community in Santa Barbara. I discovered upon moving here, Ninette was one of the first people I met, and does some beautiful projects. So it's about highlighting and then having a kind of a conversation. And Pauline is special. She is in the ensemble and plays the violin. But I have to tell this anecdote, and Pauline's gonna be so sick of me telling this anecdote over the rest of my life. But Pauline's audition, when Pauline auditioned, we had to do it in Los Angeles. And I really wanted to see her before I took a trip. So I literally took the Airbus to LAX, checked in, Pauline picked me up, and we drove to a parking lot a few minutes from the airport. And we kept searching for a space to do the audition, but it all had music in the background. And I couldn't hear her if there was music, because it was music, you know? So we literally went to the parking structure, and in the stairway of the parking structure, she auditioned. And people were walking by and thought that maybe we were asking for money or something, but they weren't clear. And they started asking her to play songs for them. And I just watched her completely seamlessly handle the situation while she's playing the violin, talking to them, and I was like, are you kidding me? This person has to be in the ensemble. And then later on, I heard about some of these beautiful projects that she's been doing that I hope she shares with us tonight, that kind of, again, bridge performance, art, music. And then we have members of our ensemble coming in and out. This conversation includes all of you, and you're welcome to be as active as you can. With that, I want to share with you how privileged I feel as a curator and as a director of this museum that we have this ensemble and that we were able to put on this exhibition. It truly is one of the most beautiful moments in my professional career to come to work and hear music and thought and watch these performers and artists create really magic. So if you all weren't able to see some of the performance and some of the exhibition, please come back. I have managed to get the entrance fee waived for this exhibition, and you can come back as many times, and I worked very hard to do that so that it would be open to the entire community. With that, I want to welcome you, thank you, and let's start with you, Ninette, and if each of you could give me a bit of a brief overview of what it is that you do, what is your passion, and share with us a little bit about how you entered in the field that you've entered, and why, if your educational background was one different than what you're working in or doing, how that brought you here, and why you thought this was interesting for us to talk about. So maybe let's give a little context, and we'll go Ninette, Pauline, and then we'll finish with you on that. You guys have a microphone for you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, Abaseh, and the MCA. My name is Ninette Paloma. I am an arts writer for the Santa Barbara Independent, Santa Barbara Magazine, and Santa Barbara Dance Works. And for the past 20 years here in the city, I have been producing art and choreographing. In 2006, I founded a conservatory that went beyond contemporary dance. It used the realm of aerial dance to create another dimension, using flight as a metaphor for various collaborations, and this is our 13th season, and we do quite a bit of multidisciplinary work here and overseas, and with various visual artists and musicians, and it's been an incredible opportunity to both get to write about art and then physically just get your hands dirty in it, which is wonderful. How did I get started? Well, I am originally from Chicago, and I was born and raised there at a time when the city was really looking to broaden their educational programming and how they could really better engage students really in the realm of the arts and kind of using the city as a teaching mechanism. So I happened to be at the right place at the right time. It was the mid-'80s, and I spent, for about 12 years, I spent 2 days of the week in classroom and the rest of the time all over the city of Chicago. So my art class was at the Art Institute, and my music class was at Orchestra Hall. And it was an incredible opportunity to feel not at all confined to my educational experience. Space plays a very big part of that. In an urban setting, everybody is clustered together. I lived in a large building with 80 other families, so space was a big deal. It was a huge commodity. So being able to move outside of the classroom and not just look at music, for example, as its own genre, but in the context of the architecture of Orchestra Hall on Michigan Avenue, really started to connect things for me. It made sense to connect the dots with space, art, sound, and I really think that it paved my entire career. I thought I was going to go into acting. I enrolled in theater school. I was at ISU, and my first year I was bored as rocks, just absolutely deflated by what I felt. It just felt not at all an authentic experience for expression. I had just come off this incredible experience in the city, so to go out to the farmland and have a completely different experience was difficult. So on a whim, I walked into an open call audition for a university-sponsored circus, and it blew my mind. It was everything that I didn't know I wanted, and it was all under one big roof. They were trapeze artists and jugglers and roller skaters, and it was a wild, wild experience. And they kept asking me back. I had just turned 18, and each week they would invite me back. And what I didn't know is I was being initiated into the very old world tradition of circus and how they have to invite you. So after about 10 auditions, they just said, you know, pick a discipline and get on it and see what happens. And I jumped on the tight wire, I grabbed an umbrella, I asked my friend if he could just lay on the tight wire, and I would just kind of jump on and around him and do a little twirl, and they were like, okay, I think we'd like you to tour with us for the rest of the year. So that shifted things for me. I moved back to the city at the end of that experience, and simultaneously enrolled in theater school at Columbia in Chicago, and then in an old world circus school in the city. And so I was doing that back to back, and again, it was that sense of really feeling that the multidisciplinary aspect of art, it was really ingrained, and everything felt connected. And I was in Europe for a while, and I worked on the minimalist aspect of the circus arts, distilling it down to the flight aspect of aerial dance. And when I moved here in 1998, I brought all of that with me. Here I am.
And that's how aerial dance was created.
Aerial dance, that genre, the actual contemporary dance genre, not to be confused with the circus arts, is from the mid-'70s. It was actually born in Oakland by an incredible contemporary dancer who created a movement called motivity with a low-flying trapeze. And she had disciples. She had about 12 students. They worked with her for a few years, and then they literally went all over the world. Someone to France, someone to New York. And I learned from one of her disciples, and then I went to France and worked with another one. And I happened to be there just at the time that this was getting big, and it was moving along, and then I brought it right here to this little city.
Thank you. It's on. The green.
My name's Pauline Lai, and I play the violin. And mostly right now, what I do in my practice is ambient violin with electronics, very experimental. I have a form that's personal to me, that I follow, that's different every time when I perform. I also collaborate with lots of different groups in LA, duos, trios, bands.
What did you study?
What did I say? I studied physics. I actually started at UCLA as a composition major, double with physics. Those two fields require a lot from a person, and so my mom convinced me that science was a little bit more practical, and I also knew in my heart that I would always go back to music, and I can always keep up with music. It's a little bit harder to figure out physics on your own. And after college, I joined a band, and that was it. I was back in. I was really terrified of being in a band because all of my training up until that moment was very classical. I was told to read music and play it, but I was never told I could do whatever I wanted. And just throughout the years, I was playing with bands, and then eventually I discovered experimental music, and that was also it. That was great to me, like this freedom to just explore your instrument however you wanted, to make a sound that was unique to you, and other people were interested in that, just like a very unique part of music.
Pauline, you might help.
Do you want me closer?
No, oh no. I can hear. Can everyone hear?
I can hear myself now.
I think it would be interesting if you shared with us kind of the 2-week journey to the beginning and now we're to, just so for those who have not been able to see the exhibition, they know the 2-week rehearsal whirling journey that got you guys to the opening day, and what your routine is like, what you as
Well, our very first day, we had to be here by 10:30 in the morning. All of us are from Los Angeles, so we all had to leave by 8:30. That day, I think one person left very early and got here at 8:30, maybe 9, because traffic is hard. And then from then on, it was just straight through. We had this song book full of pieces compiled by Ari, the artist, and we spent 8 hours a day just going through the book and figuring out
2 weeks, 6 days.
13 days.
Yeah.
We had 2 weeks, 1 day off in the middle of that. Some of us went home to play a show. All of us went home to play a show, I think. I don't know. Maybe one person stayed. And half-hour break for lunch.
But I mean more the preparation for being in an exhibition as an
Right.
artist, being a musician and now being an artist in an exhibition. You are the exhibition. So.
Yeah. The transition was strange to me because I know how to perform when I'm performing music, but we had to learn how to perform in between the music, which is very important for this piece, because since you are the art, you have to continuously be the art, and that actually requires a kind of focus, because I've been trained, and my experience has been when you're playing music, that's when you're performing, and just to have that constant focus, like we get little breaks between songs, you can be yourself when you're not playing your instrument, but in this piece, for 4 straight hours, you need to be on, and you need to be aware, constantly aware of everyone, not just the sound. You have to be aware of the space and movement, and a lot of us aren't singers, so that's very tough too, but also actually very enriching. I love I love singing. I wish I could be better, and maybe I will be at the end. More questions?
No, that's great. This is a good beginning. But yeah, so Robin, Robin, share with us a little bit. I mean, you and I have had some conversations, and I called Robin this morning because I thought he had not read my message, and yeah, because I had a really enriching conversation with Mika, who's the ensemble leader, and we do a debrief every week, and it goes between an hour and 3 hours, and she was talking about how the ensemble was working together to make the transition smoother and why the architecture was creating challenges. And so I had to call, and I was like, Robin, you need to talk to Mika, because this is really a factor that is, and as a curator, I think there was learned lessons for me. If I were to be invited to curate Consult for music elsewhere, I would probably tweak a couple of things. So where I thought I didn't want any walls and I wanted chorus walls because I wanted people to hear the music before they physically saw musicians, I now realize that they actually need spaces that divide them so that they can disappear and not be in each other's sight and play something and then come back together again. So that leads to space in you. Tell us first about you, then.
Well, compared to people in Flankman, I'm pretty boring. I just make buildings. What you brought up was interesting to me because it's around programming, like form and function, like how it works. And in some way, as an architect, like you called me and I'm thinking, man, another client with a problem. It's like, that's what, as an architect, we're dealing with constant problems. I make a joke all day long, okay, I'm going to my next patient, because it's project after project, which is essentially problem after problem after problem. And that's my job. But they're interesting problems, and that's the good news. And so when I hear you talk about like what you did here at the Spades with the separations, and then how the ensemble is reacting to the space, I find that pretty interesting, obviously, because constant part of my practice, and I have a lot of help, by the way, and I have a lot of people here tonight. Appreciate that. We'll talk about that in a second. Constant interaction with the users of the building, right? And how it works, and you have to listen, and then you have to then push back, and it's this constant push and pull. And one of the interesting things about how you curated this, how Ari conceptualized this, from my standpoint, is that the ensemble kind of has to deal with the building. These aren't buildings purpose-built for, we'll get into this more, but these buildings weren't built for musical ensemble to play 4 or 5 hours a day. Just nobody ever thought about that. And I think, frankly, that's one of the most interesting things about this whole piece and this whole endeavor. So, in my practice, by the way, I practice here in Santa Barbara. I don't do any houses with pretty little red tiles and white plaster walls, though I love that kind of architecture. And there's 75 other architects in the phone book who can do that. We really try to push the language of architecture. You talk about the passion of what we're doing. I'm interested in pushing cross-disciplinary. I started out my undergraduate, I was an art major, painting and drawing. I thought I was going to go do my MFA. And I got derailed by some really good art historian and theorists at UCSB. I went to UCSB as an undergrad, and convinced me to go and get my master's in architecture. To that point, I was on my way to trying to make pretty pictures of a wall inside a gallery. But all along through the practice, we're always trying to push it. I've got some people here tonight. Miles is here from my office. Thanks for coming. Mike Nesbitt, Nicholas, kind of the nucleus. Where's Lonnie? Lonnie's there's sorry, Lonnie's right there. But kind of the nucleus of a group that really push and understand that architecture is a language to be pushed and evolved and to move forward. So that's where I really come from in terms of architecture. And obviously working with people who need to solve the issues that we do. So
That's a good beginning. Okay. So all four of us relate to space as a means for creating, producing, and presenting our work, although very different. Curator, dancer, performer, architect, musician, artist. We're diverse, but are we conceptually related?
Absolutely. Any artist has to have a real grounding sense of the space that they are surrounded by and the bones of it, and then what you want to do ultimately with that canvas. When we work in a theater, it's very easy to start with a clean slate. We have everything we need at our disposal. Wonderful rigging, a terrific tech crew. It makes our jobs easier. We have our vision, and then this incredible theater just opens it up for us. When we do site-specific work, it becomes something completely different. We start by looking up at the ceiling and taking a look at that. I find myself, every time I walk into a new space, I always look up, and that's where I start.
Me too.
Me too, yeah, absolutely. And even when we walked into that space and it was dark and the musicians were really playing in this real dim sense of really wanting you to connect low. But the first thing I did is I looked up at that sloping ceiling and then how it brought us, the audience, down slowly into that cavernous little space where the musicians were playing. And to me, that is exactly what our relationship with art is, with that space.
Robin, what do you think? Are we related? Are we
Oh.
conceptually related?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when I'm thinking about the space and as architects we're making the space, you do speculate on how people are going to walk in and look at it and think about it, and how you never know a musician, somebody who's interested in hanging something from a ceiling. That might be one of the reasons you're looking at the ceiling. I think that definitely that interaction, though typically I'm looking at it from a functional and maybe light standpoint and things like that I'm interested in terms of the space. But Alex knows I have this whole thing about scenes, groups in particular, about how ugly they are, but also how wonderfully functional they are, other things. And also how unintentional. That's another subject.
Paul, and maybe when you answer, talk about Seance, which is the piece that happened in that room, and in particular, like, it would be nice, like, to shed some light on some of the particular pieces, and why do you all go to do Seance there?
Well, sound needs good space. It needs good acoustics. In my own practice, I actually, my set changes, my performance changes depending on what space I'm in, and how resonant it is, because I rely a lot on feedback from the room. And Seance, we just all naturally wanted to be in there because it could be very dark, but also it's the best sounding room in this entire museum. It just has beautiful reverb. I like to go in there during singing pieces to feel better about myself. And I like to tune in there. It just sounds very nice. Space is very related to, to music and to movement, and just bodies in general. in a space changes how it sounds.
Have you worked, for instance, with movement? Like, have you worked in a piece where there was dance or?
Well, movement, definitely. I worked in a piece called Skater's Score, where we had 5 deaf skateboarders. There's actually only 10 professional deaf skateboarders in the United States, and we had 5 of them in Lincoln Heights Park. And so they were deaf, and they just did their skateboarding in this skate park in the bowl, and we had to respond. We had a quartet responding to their movement, and we actually followed them on foot and played after them. It was violin, upright bass, accordion, and saxophone. And they couldn't hear it, they could feel our vibrations. And there was a part where they would like jump on this rail, and it would create this like beautiful dinging sound, and they could feel it, but we could hear it, and we could respond to it. And that was definitely a very nice piece of space. And movement, lots of movement.
What is the first thing you notice when you go into a space?
How it sounds. Or just if there are people in there when they're talking, I definitely hear the sound, how voices echo. If no one's in there, I notice the floor, because the floor is very important for acoustics. Also the ceiling, but mostly the floor for some reason. I don't know.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And you both said that you look up at the ceiling, so that's the first thing you do when you go into a space is look up at the ceiling?
Can I add that?
Yes, sure.
Just one thought about, as an architect and working on a space, the further I've got in my career, the less I've been concerned about what people think about the space. So, and what I mean by that is that I can't anticipate what's going to happen, who's going to walk in, but hopefully you create a space that works on so many different levels, and that as an architect you have to kind of be able to synthesize what it is, so that a musician, a dancer, a mathematician, somebody comes into the space and there's something they can grab, but you can never anticipate. And that's where form starts to assert itself over function. And I think Ari's wrestling with that to some degree with the Kunsthalle, the music in these spaces.
They're wrestling with it. The ensemble is wrestling with it. It's an interesting.
Yeah, Ari's introduced the notion.
Yeah.
But it's the ensemble that has to do the hard work.
Which is why it's a very generous recognition of the ensembles. This show succeeds and fails on the strength of the ensemble and how the ensemble takes on that challenge. And so the beauty of this exhibition, yes, I'm plugging it again, is that if you come in the initial weeks to see it, it will be a completely different exhibition by the end of the 6 weeks, because every week it's being tweaked to kind of reach that perfect imperfect. Are there instances in your work that you can speak to that imperfect perfect working? Certainly couldn't be for architecture, but there are elements of imperfection that ended up creating beauty. But maybe can you talk a little about the imperfect perfect?
Absolutely. I think as a dancer you learn early on that you work within a series of compromises, spatial compromise and audience compromise. And just recently we did an incredible collaboration with Opera Santa Barbara for the Granada Theater's gala, where we were tasked to create a piece against the backdrop of this beautiful aria that one of the singers was going to perform way down, actually up, I should say, in the box, and we would be on stage. And so that spatial disconnect shifted everything for how we were going to approach this work. There was also the challenge of the audience actually being invited onto the stage for the performance and literally surrounding the performers with no more than just a couple of planters, maybe around to kind of give a sort of border. And so under ideal conditions, you would be able to have all the space that you wanted and exactly what you wanted. And yet I always feel that it's in those little moments of what we refer to as imperfection. You've got all of these things to work with that I think is where beauty lies. Because I found myself choreographing a quiet, intimate fabrics piece that moved in a much more vertical way, much less horizontal, where when the dancer came down and just moved a little bit, she was able to connect with the audience right away. So that intimacy played. And then there was that sense of the singer, that sound just traveled. It bounced off the audience, the performer, and there was a sense of communication without any words between the artist and the performer in a way that we had never experienced, because the singer was literally singing to us and we were performing for her as well as the audience. It was a gorgeous, completely imperfect performance, and we really enjoyed it.
Yes, that's nice. Robin. The perfect. And what you do.
You wake up every morning thinking a building has to be perfect. And of course, it's a long day of compromises, dealing with imperfections. Yet, there are moments where things happen, I call them happy accidents, where something works out that you didn't expect. But imperfection, I think, actually is what, especially in architecture, it's for me, it's about the hand, about the sense of making, and that's where you can get some degree of soul, so to speak, to the building. Feel the people who made it, and I think those are the most interesting buildings ultimately. And that involves sometimes perfection as an aspiration. Really, it's actually imperfect, but it's the imperfections. It's like this floor. You look at the floor; it's got cracks. But it has a personality, and that's why people, I think, are in love with concrete floors. You know, they start to look. It's not perfect. So I relate to it from a material standpoint.
Holly, maybe you can, part of your response, you could maybe talk about that as a musician and now having to work on a piece that you're responsible for somehow perfecting the imperfection and the perfection, and how does the process work? Because I find that many people are confused. They think that when we started talking about this show, this exhibition, people ask, so is it like a gig? What days are they playing? And I'm like, 5 days a week. It's the show, it's the exhibition. It's 5 days, 4 hours of music and performance and movement. And until people live it, they really don't know what we're talking about. Maybe you have a more beautiful way of putting it, since you are the art, but maybe talk a little bit about that and what it means for you from your perspective.
I think when relating to imperfection and perfection in music and art, if you have something that's too perfect, too beautiful, it's boring, because we're humans and we're not perfect. And how is it relatable if something is so on a pedestal and beautiful and unreachable? And I personally, if I go see music or see art, I look for imperfection, for that little bit of humanity as a from the performer, because that's what makes it interesting to me. Like just like a little bit of crack in their voice, or just like a slip of their finger, or just like a little personality. That's like.
How are you all dealing with the humanity of it? Because I mean, it's interesting because this exhibition for me is because of me. This is you should know as curators, this is the only time we get to be selfish, is that we do projects that somehow answer to something in here. And for me, it was this. I think dance. I probably am partial. Dance to me is just. I think it's like, I don't know, chocolate on top of chocolate on top of chocolate. But it's just. And music was something that I was very intimidated by because I was meant to learn to play piano. Everybody in my family knew, and it was kind of part of being an educated person was you should play an instrument. And then there was a revolution, and that education went out the door. And so I suddenly was surrounded by people who knew Mahler and Beethoven and could distinguish things, and I didn't. And I felt so conscious and intimidated by this fact. And I didn't want to go to concerts with people. I would just go alone or by myself, just so that I could train my ear to listen. But through contemporary art, I found a kind way of getting back. And actually, it's, as a curator, it's this exhibition and doing projects like this has been. I truly wake up happy every day, despite how tired I am. I wake up happy because it's really something that I never expected. And I've had the same feeling in another exhibition, which was purely dance. It was Anne-Theresa Kirschmacher in Wiel's Museum in Brussels, which this museum I look up to so much, and the director and the curator. They did a 14-hour dance exhibition that just for 6 weeks was dance, and you could come and go, and dancers were all around you. But how do you relate to it? Because I can hear, I've learned by listening to you all when the humanity comes out. Like I hear the imperfections, but not because I have knowledge, but because I've spent now time, and I watch you guys, and I look at you all, I read you guys. That's how I can tell when something is not going.
You just have to keep going. You can't stop. And I think the interesting part of this performance every day is that every moment is very different. And we can try to recreate it, but you can't recreate every single moment exactly. And that's what makes it interesting for me, is when it's different, and it's slightly different every day. Or like if something's out of place, or someone's a little sick or tired, we all kind of just try to make up for that somehow. We try to recover in the moment and just keep moving. That's all we can do. Can't stop.
How do you deal with it post? Do you deconstruct it for the next day?
We do debrief and talk about what could go better or what went well, like any other ongoing project. There's constant self-critique, and just to try to make it a little bit better somehow. Or
how do you deal with it when there is little or no audience in the space? How does that affect how you perform?
I'm totally fine personally. I just enjoy the moment as it is.
But it is a challenge.
It is a challenge sometimes, but actually I don't really care if anyone's around. I'm maybe one of
I think you're
few
unique.
people.
Yeah.
Because I can still appreciate like what's happening.
Okay. Ninette and Robin, maybe you guys could share a little bit about how you interact with your audience. I mean, yours on an individual level, like a client, or in the greater context of once something is open to people feeling it and living it, so that moment where, in your case, something that you built, people start interacting with it, how do you deal with that? And in your case, you know, when you've choreographed, you've created the piece, and it starts in such a personal space and it becomes such a public. I find that all our professions really start in such a personal place. You're creating, you're proposing, and like privacy, and then what we put forth is so public and open to criticism and judgment and observation. How do you all deal with that?
Paulina, you said something at the very beginning that really struck me with regards to even when people think you are improvising, that it really isn't, that you're very focused and aware of your surroundings and sound and what's happening. And movement is exactly the same way. You can't be precious about producing work because it can be very intimate and very insular when it's you and the artist, and you're working with very intimate storylines and with bodies, very different and unique bodies. And once all of that is over, you just let it go. And you literally have to let it go, because once it has an audience, it becomes something completely different. The interpretations, the reactions, places where I wouldn't even think might get a reaction, get the most reaction. Some days, something really hits somebody, and then other days, a completely different aspect people are really speaking about. It is fascinating, and I think one of the most rewarding aspects of creating and producing art is the complete and utter unpredictability of bringing an audience into it, no matter how small or large.
I'm imagining a big bleacher full of people cheering for my building when I'm done. Doesn't quite work that way. Architecture is a weird sport. You get feedback on so many different little levels. Obviously, client, you get feedback which can be positive and negative. You hear from colleagues. You might get AIA awards. You might lecture and show buildings, and people clap and enjoy it. Things like that. And that's one of the ways you, quote, have an audience. But the real audience, obviously, is after you've left the scene and people are using the building and driving by it and commenting on it or walking through it. And I may never hear any of those reactions outside of maybe an occasional comment or an article I see or something. Or sometimes I'll see my buildings in movies. I've been in a movie, but wait a minute, that's one of that's, you know, like things like that where it actually has like a little audience or advertisements, stuff like that on TV, which is fun. But otherwise, it's not, if you're not in architecture to get that kind of feedback that I think like a musician in a performance has that relationship with an audience, typically in a traditional format. So we're operating in kind of a different milieu, but there is an audience.
I was interviewing Jacqueline, your board president here at the MCA, for an upcoming piece, and she has this incredible art collection, over 200 pieces in her home, everything from sculpture to photography. She likes the imperfect. She wants the things that really charge you up when you wake up in the morning. And she was telling me a story about a building that she loves in Texas that has sat in has an austere look to it, and there's this little area in the center that people tend to just kind of rush back and forth. They just walk by it. And she decided to commission a piece of work in the center of that space, and took a long time, chose that piece, and she said she loves to go there every time she's in Texas and just sit there and watch people walk through that space and then see how they react and their experience, because space and art are colliding in your everyday. And how does that rub you? And that's, I think, at the crux of your art, really. How does your work rub people on an everyday, as opposed to as this like lovely audience on stage and the nitty gritty?
Yeah, I agree.
I get that one back. I'll tell you. I'm curious to hear you talk about how this exhibition, this work has changed the way you approach your work, or it hasn't, or how you relate to space and the new context of, though you are one of the only ensemble members I recall from the auditions that have been doing this border artistic music projects, contemporary art projects, shall we say, that incorporate music and movement, but most have not, most have never been. So now it's, if you think historically, a museum is not a space where we think we're gonna listen to music, which is why it acoustically is not built for one. However, when I built a museum, when we built this museum, the day, God willing, it happens, we will make sure that it's acoustically, also we will make sure of that, because it is important. But how has that changed in you? How does this work in all its different ways? Like from having an exhibition that is fully music, truly music, not like an installation that gets activated once every few weeks, but a true music exhibition.
Well, my awareness of space has changed and how I move in it. Because before, I would just think about how the sound filled the space, and I would think about, my presence in the space, but not necessarily moving in the space, because when I perform, I don't change positions in any way. Maybe if I'm on the stage, I'll move a little bit, but you're still in this like confined area. You're not thinking about like, where am I going to go to next? How am I going to feel my physical body? Like, how am I going to move my physical body in the space and fill it up that way? And like, the energy of my body. It's always been how will my sound fill the space? And I guess in that way that's affected me. I've been in pieces before, but it's always been sound-based. I've played in an elevator. We do that here in this piece also. And also I've played outside on like a catwalk in a museum. And that was very interesting. Like I tried everyone in that piece. There were 9 of us, and we were all throughout the Getty, each doing. It was a timed performance. We had to look at our phones, and we had to display different motifs at different times. And I could see one person. I could see and hear one person, and I couldn't. No one else. So I just had to play as loudly as I could. So.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about how the architecture has impacted the decision-making process around the spaces. And I could go on for a long time, but I promise I won't, because I'm curious about these things. But I'll ask that and then open it up to you all, asking a couple of questions if you're brave enough to do it. If not, I have a couple more. But how have you all been dealing with the challenge of that? And then how would it have affected had we had a dancer with us? Because I did audition dancers. Constanza and I looked at a lot of those that did do it, but it was determined that maybe the dynamics, people would misunderstand they would create a hierarchy, whether the ensemble was playing for the dancer or the dancer was, so it would confuse people, and that's what led to us keeping it purely with music and movement by the ensemble members.
Well, I feel like the main concern with this space is that each piece has to have a clear area. When we move from piece to piece, it has to be clear that we're changing. And since it's such a small space, like we can only move so many feet. But to solve that problem, we just change our configuration a little bit, or we definitely use the alcove a lot in the little room. Another challenge is sound. Definitely sound bleed. It's not possible, like you have something loud in here and you have something quiet there. It's conceptually very interesting that there's someone in the corner being very quiet, but sound-wise, it's very different. Those are the main problems, I think.
Robin, music and architecture, there's so much has been written about the similarities, rhythm, texture, harmony, proportion. Does music or dance influence the way, has it ever been something that you've considered when you're building a place? I mean, I know for your project in Santa Barbara that I'm close to, art, and that's all part of its DNA, so you have to think of how to allow the artworks to breathe, but what about music and dance?
Well, there's been a lot of, there's the saying, I forget who said it, about in classical architecture being frozen music. There's that term, probably everybody's heard that. And obviously that has to do with the rhythm of structure, ornamentation inside a structure, and so on. It's occurred, first of all, and music is part of our studio, our working atmosphere. And I found that working with music it helps. I think it actually makes a difference as I'm working and drawing or thinking about structure. I found that I could be listening to Radiohead and one type of building's going to come out of it, or if I'm listening to the classical music station, I find something starts coming. It's very just the influence of kind of your creative process. I think anybody here who's done any creative endeavor, right? You turn on music, and I think architects. But there's definitely, I think of music. Miles and I were talking earlier about the notational aspect of music, right? You walk around with your book. I'm fascinated by that book. And because I look at that, but yet somehow that will translate into sound, and we make plans, and hopefully somehow those pieces of paper are going to turn into, so the notion of the rhythm, the meter, to me, really there's a structural conversation. It's a very important aspect of practicing.
I wanted to ask Ninette, and with this, my last question, and then it's for you guys, is we've moved from listening to music and watching dance or to performative things being in auditoriums. This was one of the other reasons I thought this exhibition would be well received in Santa Barbara, because there's such a rich community of performance here. We have the SB Bowl, the Academy of the West. We have what you do in other dance companies. We have the ensemble theater. There's so much going on, but the cost sometimes can be prohibitive. Someone might not be able to afford to go to, the SB Bowl, and this is a free exhibition, but even if it was $5, it's very affordable and brings in an entirely new generation of, not by age, but people that have not been exposed to that. how do you all kind of, how do you make peace with the fact that we went from music and performance being this regal thing? I mean, things were designed for an audience. You know, you couldn't listen to song on an iPod, you know, when it was meant to be a Lascada. It was meant to be, you know, it was a very social act, and now music you can listen to, watch on your iPhone, some dance, you know, movement. It's completely moved in a different direction. And we're now putting it in a museum, other people are as well, but how does that feel for you two in particular? Like that compromise, how do you deal with it?
Well, you know the term med that you say to a dancer before they perform. Has anybody heard that term? It's a form of good luck, and merde in French is shit. And it comes from the old theater times where the carriages would line up outside of the theater and wait there, and the amount of manure on the street would then translate to an incredible amount of people in the seats in the theater. So the more poop that was on the street, the bigger your audience is going to be. This was a good thing, and people say this, dancers say this. You're looking at me like you've never heard this before. But dancers say to one another, "Man," to this day. Edith Wharton in The Age of Innocence said that one thing she noticed about those incredible theater goers is the reason why those carriages were waiting outside throughout the performance is because audiences were just as eager to leave art as they were to enter it. And so intimacy in art is so important. It is not a precious thing. It is not something that is attainable for a select audience. It is not something to be confined in this idealistic box full of all kinds of soapbox sentiment. The Flexus movement said it best, art is easy. We're the complicated ones. And so that is how we should be able to experience art, in a way that feels approachable and pedestrian, as you said, real and honest, and in all kinds of spaces, not just the gorgeous, grandiose ones, as much as I love them.
Polly, do you want to add something, and then we can switch, ask the audience if they have any question?
Music as a recorded medium is very disappointing these days because it's just become background for most people. You go to the grocery store and you hear like shredding rock music that used to be in stadiums. And it's just there while you're shopping. But I think that you can't replace live music at all. There's still people who seek that out because it's a very social thing. It's a very human thing that people need to see music. And I don't think that will go away. Even if someone's never seen live music, when they do, it's pretty good.
It's true. Does anyone have any questions for Seance? Comments? Sure.
I've got a ton of questions, a ton of comments.
Okay.
But I mean, I'm trying to keep it short. I mean, I think just the manifesto, and I think the group that's up here in terms of representing dance, architecture, music is very complex, and I think an incredible collage. I think when I make a comment and hopefully get to a question, I think a question dictated towards the musician, because I'm very interested in process and audience. Audience, I think, in terms of finish, because typically we have different stages of an audience. When we're practicing, a lot of times we're practicing ourselves, or we're practicing with colleagues. There's no audience there, and the audience, whether it is the audience on stage or the audience represents a client, the closer you get towards that audience, the closer you get towards a finish. And a lot of times, finish audience can bring anxiety, anxiousness, which can affect the representation of the individual. Now, sometimes some artists they use that anxiousness to their advantage. Like an athlete, they get in a game, or like a musician, they get in a concert, and in a certain sense, the finisher of the audience disappears. And I think these are just really kind of personal implications, I think, for the individual to understand when that audience is present and when that audience disappears. And I think to the original notion of how you do mad, I think is really incredible. And the idea of trying to search for a place with no audience and finding that point where you could, because in a certain sense, I think to this, like there's always potentially no audience and potentially there's always an audience. It kind of depends on the individual. And I guess maybe now getting to a question to you, I'm curious, especially because I'm familiar with the performance you did with the Deaf and the Skateboarders, and in more of like a kind of happening. I mean, it kind of has like more of a happening capital sense to think about that you guys have practice. You guys came here for 2 weeks and you guys practice. And so in my head, I'm thinking, what are you guys practicing? And what's the judgment of that practice? And you're even though this isn't about an audience, you're practicing for 2 weeks to get to an audience. And I'm interested in now, since you've kind of gone through that, in retrospect, was there a point during that practice that you felt was closer to the manifesto than maybe to where it got to anytime here?
I think we're very close to the manifesto right now in performance. During practice, we were more concerned about being able to play the pieces well, because we're all musicians and we want to do well. We want to play. I mean, it's that whole perfection thing. You want to sound good. We were very concerned about sound, but now we're concerned about being engaging, and it's being engaging while playing music isn't hard. I don't think it's hard for any of us in this ensemble, but being engaging while not playing music is new for most of us. And for me personally, it feels hard. It's a very different part of my brain that I don't usually use. So it feels hard because we haven't practiced that in our daily music practice, to say practice. But
Do you have comments to make as also on that, how it feels in performances that you guys? I have to say, I don't know if it's my Iranianness or what, but I worry about them all day. I do worry about the audience because I've seen, I think it was more evident the first week. I could feel when the energy would drop when people walked out, because when I think about the music when you're playing when you go to perform in Los Angeles in a space, in a club or something like that, those 30 or 40 or 100 people chose, they bought the ticket, they're there, and they're there for an hour and a half too, and then they go. Whereas here, it's, they're on for 4 hours, and sometimes, there's 3 or 4 people. The energy is very different. We feed off of, all 3 of you feed off of people's energy. And I think one of my biggest moments with you all as an ensemble is how you're learning to be more compassionate and perform at that same high level, whether there's 2 or 0 or 50 people. I don't know what you want to say.
Well, I glimpsed, you guys were playing, I forget the name of the piece, but there was a moment where you all were so in the piece that I don't think you were really too concerned about the audience or what was going on. You were in the piece. And I think that's kind of what Mike's getting at, right, in those moments.
we love playing that one, so it's easy to get lost in it.
Yeah.
And in that moment, we're not following the manifesto because we're just too into ourselves, and it should be this piece is about the audience being able to interact no boundaries between us and the audience. And when we do lose ourselves in the music, we create a boundary with the observer, and it creates this bubble, and people feel like they can't enter, they can't bring their own energy to it. It's like, yeah, the audience, we're not feeding on the audience, and that's why we're feeding on each other. And yeah,
Well,
we might as well be on stage.
true, but it is really beautiful at the same time. I want to thank you all. I think that we could have a part 2, that's for sure. I hope that we have an opportunity to work with you and dance. I really encourage you all to come and watch. This is the only time you're going to get to eat inside of a museum. People, bring your lunch and just hang out. And Thursdays and Fridays, at the ensemble, the exhibition is till 7 p.m. So I'll buy you a beer. Just come and watch. It's such an amazing, amazing thing. So thank you to you all for coming. I appreciate you giving your Wednesday evening